Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Backseat Fighter podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Binns, and I'm so excited to be back doing the best MMA podcast in the game right here, right now. Obviously, we've got a huge fight night this weekend in Mexico City, the main event between Brandon Moreno and Steve Erceg. So I'm just really excited to get into that. But before we do, I do have some announcements. The giveaway is still coming, guys. I remember I announced when I hit 50 subscribers that I was going to be doing a giveaway. It's still coming. I'm a one-man band over here. So just remember that it's still on the process of getting things done. And I will let you know. We're now up to 70 subscribers. Thank you so much, everybody who has hit that subscribe button. Please hit subscribe if you are enjoying the content, the podcast episodes, and of course, the fight reactions, the watch-alongs that I've been doing. Really enjoying those. I do have to say also that we are going to be having more fighter interviews coming back to the podcast. I know it's been a while since we've had a fighter on the show. It's my favorite part and what I've been really wanting to do with this podcast. So I've been speaking with people. We're getting back to it. We're going to get back to the main part of this show, which is, healthily growing this space, having sophisticated conversations with the people who make the sport, which is the fighters, and connecting with fans and media like myself. But let's just get into it. I'm going to be doing the prediction and analysis about Steve Erceg versus Brandon Moreno this weekend, just the main event. And then I want to have a little bit of a conversation that I meant to have after the Pereira versus Ankalaev. Don't know why I said Pereira. The Alex Pereira versus Ankalaev fight about judging and scoring in MMA when it comes to grappling, especially against the fence. And we're going to get into that. And that's a discussion that I really have been burning to have. So let's get into this main event this weekend. Obviously, Brandon Moreno is probably one of my favorite fighters. Probably has the coolest shorts of the UFC at the moment, with showing the heritage of the Mexican people on his shorts. I lived in Mexico for a year. I lived in Mexico City, and I wish I had gone to a UFC event over there. So super jealous that I'm not over there right now. And I was thinking somehow, how can I get over there to go watch this fight? But he's fighting Steve Erceg, who is an absolute striking beast. But you know what? I am going to start with Brandon Moreno because I think as a former champion, he deserves that kind of respect. This is a guy who's obviously been multiple-time champion, interim champion, undisputed champion at flyweight, has the most significant strikes in flyweight history, an absolute beast, main event fighter, constantly fighting in a 5-round fight, and brings into this fight so much experience, so much danger, and such a threat to Steve Erceg that it's going to be definitely very interesting when it comes to the analysis of this fight. Steve Erceg obviously coming off 2 huge losses. Obviously a very tight fight with the current champ, one of my favorite fighters, probably, I feel a fighter who's disrespected in Alexandre Pantoja. I think he should be higher on the pound for pound list. Very close fight against him, makes a mistake, which we'll get into in that fight. And of course, comes off that knockout loss to Kai Kara-France in the first round most recently. And that was fairly recent. So to see him come back now against a guy like Brandon Moreno, it makes me feel, it could be a little bit of a controversial decision there. But let me talk about Brandon Moreno and his fights. Obviously he took a break after coming off that back-to-back losses to Pantoja and Brandon Royval. I don't know why I said it like that, but Brandon Royval. And, those were 2 huge losses for Brandon Moreno, especially somebody who has been a former champion, somebody who was still had aspirations of being a champion, to lose in the fashion that he did, especially in that Royval fight where he just didn't look like himself. He was getting backed up against the cage constantly. And for somebody like Moreno to be, not himself, not being able to put the pressure on and getting dominated in a certain sense against Royval, it did cause concern for some of his fans and probably himself, which is why he took that 8-month break to get away from the sport, to get away from the burnout. We spoke to Bobby Winder, for example, an up-and-coming fighter in Cage Warriors, amazing fighter, going to be in the UFC for sure. He spoke about burnout. He spoke about how he has to orientate his camps. He has to take, a week off here and there.
If I'm feeling burnt out, I just kind of will take a break for let's call it a week. I need to find out why I miss why I was doing this. And I always miss it every time I take a break. But those breaks are so necessary for me to keep it fun, because if not, then I'm just on burnout the whole time.
You see people like Volkanovski and Adesanya and these active champions. That's what makes them so special and why their respect needs to be so high, because people like Brandon Moreno as well, you're back to back camps, 16-week camps, 12-week camps, you obviously have the fight as well. If you're taking damage in the octagon, you're taking damage in sparring, you know, you're not having time for yourself. It gets difficult. So taking that 8 months to get out of the game, to remove himself, you know, he announced he was taking a break. People were worried it was going to be for a while. People were worried that he was thinking about retirement. In actuality, it was only 8 months. And my second episode of this podcast ever was, you know, analyzing Brandon Moreno and Amir Albazi for their main event last year, at the end of last year. So he comes back against Amir Albazi and looks absolutely tremendous, fast, pressure. You know, he was able to control the octagon, push Albazi back against the fence, throw off the Albazi jabs, the looping hooks that just was so devastating. You know, he was flying in with the flying knees, throwing elbows. It was incredible in terms of the performance. And obviously at the end, wobbles him with the hooks and he does a rolling thunder at the end. I mean, he was really just showing off at the end there. But it was an utter complete domination. And the thing about Brandon Moreno, especially in that fight and throughout his entire career, especially that, you know, quadrilogy with Davis and Figueiredo, he's so slick and he fires so well of his opponent's jabs and he times it so well. He's such a good counter puncher and he's so fast, and his volume and his cardio means he can do it for the 5 rounds, which means your only game plan is to try and, you know, really hurt Brandon Moreno and really push him back, which we'll get onto in a second. But the biggest thing about Brandon Moreno, in my opinion, is his well-roundedness. There's not a point or a part of his game where I feel like he is weak, where I feel like he's not world-class top level. Now, you could talk about his grappling, maybe this here and there, but he's got a submission win over Davis and Figueiredo. You know, he was able to stop takedowns in that Amir Albazi fight. He's really, really good on the ground as well. But even just in the different elements of the stand-up, you see him obviously as a counterpuncher, as I mentioned, his ability to push forward, put the pressure on his opponents, control the octagon with his footwork, make sure that he's staying on the inside or the outside of that lead foot of his opponent, pushing them back against the cage, and even coming off the exit of the clinch. That's something I always talk about. And listen, this is called the Backseat Fighter podcast. I stress it every episode. The backseat fighter, it's a play on the term backseat driver. I'm not in the driver's seat. I'm not a fighter. I'm not experienced it myself. And sometimes when I'm giving this analysis, the whole point is that I'm aware of my position in this sport. And I wish more sports media outlets did this, where they understood that I understand I'm not a fighter. But for me, when I'm breaking down these fights and I'm giving my opinion, I really try to do my due diligence, my research, care about them as humans, not just as fighters, not just as like people going in an octagon for entertainment, which obviously it is entertainment. Fighting is the most pure and beautiful entertainment in the game. But I'm really trying to break down what's going on and appreciating them. So when I'm looking at Brandon Moreno in terms of the striking elements, I'm also watching fighters when they exit clinches. I think that's one of the most telling factors about how good a fighter is, how intelligent they are on the feet. What do they do when they break the clinch, when they exit the clinch? Are they firing off the clinch? Are they changing an angle? Are they getting out in front of their opponents? You know, fighting, as I've learned in terms of training on my own and Muay Thai and watching people like Demetrius Johnson recently and his breakdowns, fighting is all about angles. It's all about hitting your opponent where they can't hit you, which means getting away from being in front of them, getting to an angle, getting to the side of them where you can punch them and they can't punch you back. And what Brandon Moreno does so well is exit the clinch, and in that Amir Albazi fights, throws the left hook, wobbles him badly, drops him. And it's going to be very key in this Erceg fight as well. Wow, I went on an absolute rant there. But I was all over the place, but I'm really trying to just say, like, Brandon Moreno is one of those elite fighters in this game, one of the legendary fighters in this game. And it's all about his in-fight IQ, his in-fight adjustments, paired with his incredible speed, his incredible durability, his incredible cardio, his ability to take a punch, all the intangibles that we could go into. But this is, one of the greatest fighters of this generation, one of the greatest flyweights of all time. And Steve Erceg has a mountain to climb here, obviously. But if we think about Steve Erceg as a fighter, I mean, the first time he really came onto the popular scene in terms of the UFC was when he got that title shot against Pantoja, when he was, relatively low in the rankings. I believe at the time, maybe he was 13th ranked in the world. I want to say that. Please fact check me if I'm wrong. I know he's number 9, I believe, at the moment, But when he entered that Pantoja fight, I believe he was lurking somewhere down 13. And I think he was the lowest ranked fighter to ever get a title shot. If these are things that I'm not clear and saying off memory. So please correct me if I'm wrong. But when he got that fight, people didn't expect to see the striking masterclass that he put on against Pantoja. And, obviously in those first couple of rounds, you saw that he was really ready for this moment. And I think for me, the most telling round when I was like, oh my goodness, was that second round against Pantoja. I mean, he was throwing the counters so well. I think of Pantoja, because you know how Pantoja fights. He's in your face, he's swinging, and he's really trying to hurt you every single moment in that fight, right? He's pushing you back, and he doesn't have the most slick striking in the sport, right? But it was an insane fight because you see that second round Steve Erceg performance, right? He gets the elbows going, he gets the multiple combinations off as Pantoja is closing the distance to him, and I'll put some photos up next to me so you can see. As Pantoja is closing the distance on him, he's just throwing uppercuts, throwing hooks, check left hooks in, and you're like, oh my God, he's really landing. And you see, I think it's Dominic Cruz at the time, or sorry, Paul Felder and Daniel Cormier on the broadcast. And they're talking about, oh my God, his boxing is so slick. I don't think there's any boxer in the flyweight division that can even mess with Steve Erceg on the feet. That was the props they were giving him in that moment. And the way Pantoja won that fight is the way Pantoja wins a lot of his fights, is that he's got an extra dog. He's got an extra layer he can dig deep into that no other fighters can't do. And they don't have that toughness that Pantoja has. But Pantoja is also incredibly skilled and he's incredibly smart. He knows how to use, he knows where he's not the best and he knows where he is the best. His grappling, his wrestling. And that's why when Steve Erceg shot for that takedown towards the end of the fight, the whole arena sighed. The broadcast were like, oh my goodness. Steve Erceg's corner were probably in despair. And Pantoja and his mind and his corner are probably cheering because Steve Erceg made a key mistake. He was probably on the verge or was definitely in contention. It was such a close fight that he could have won a title that night, but decided to take that shot, try to wrestle. And it was just a slight lack of experience that you would expect for somebody who was such a low ranking and wasn't expected to get a title shot at the time. That doesn't mean he wasn't ready for the moment because he obviously was. We saw it in his performance. But at the end of the day, he made a mistake. Pantoja rightfully wins the decision. And then you're like, okay, Steve Erceg has arrived. Who is he going to fight next? Goes in to fight Kai Kara France. And Kai Kara France is a really elite fighter in this division. Obviously next in line for the title shot and at flyweight. Somebody who Brandon Moreno himself has beat by knockout before. I think it was with a body kick, if I'm not mistaken. But as soon as that first round, it was a first round knockout, as we know. But as soon as that first round kicks off, Kai Kara France goes right hand over the top, left hook looping behind it. And the right hand connects, but the left hand doesn't. And, you start to say, okay, Steve Erceg is really good with the distance. He's managing that. It's not going to connect. And he's so good. What Steve Erceg is so good at is he's a counter puncher, but he creates the pressure. He moves forward with his footwork, pushing you back towards the cage as he did with Kai Kara France. And he's still waiting for you to throw. The same way he did against Pantoja in their fight. Every time Pantoja went to throw a leg kick, for example, right hand straight down the pipe from Erceg. Same with Kai Kara France. Every time Kai Kara France tried to put something out there, Steve Erceg was throwing. And he does such a good job at that. He throws at the same time as his opponent. And you'll see that with elite strikers. It's an offbeat way of striking where it's not you go, I go. They're going when you're going, and they're so stubborn in their counter punch that it makes it almost impossible sometimes for their opponent to even do anything to them. Because also I feel like being a great striker is about patience. It's about being stubborn as hell and not throwing. If you're a counter puncher, not throwing too early. And if you are throwing, it's always to generate a movement from your opponent so then you can then counter punch. It's an absolute game of chess when you see elite strikers in there like Steve Erceg. But he was doing such a good job. I mean, Steve Erceg's jab is one of the best jabs I've seen in the sport for me. It's absolutely incredible. And the way he was able to push Kai Kara France back against the cage was working amazingly for him. The thing about Kai Kara France made about 2 minutes into that fight, he made an adjustment whereby he was stepping into the range. Like he did that first combination he threw. just coming off the back of the cage, stepping in fully, throwing 2 hooks. And what that did was push Steve Erceg back at least momentarily in those first few exchanges. But what also I feel like changed the fight was that when Steve Erceg comes in with that nice guard, comes in with that lead leg, trying to push Kai Kara-France back, there's one point where Kai Kara-France just blasts a leg kick, absolutely blasts it. One of the hardest leg kicks I've seen in terms of just single power leg kick, because he didn't throw that many of them. Just absolutely blasted Steve Erceg as he stepped in. And I feel like that relieved some of the pressure. It made Steve Erceg more willing to take a step back. And then obviously, as we know, Kai starts throwing to the body, does incredible body shots in that fight, hooks to the body, right hands to the body, jabs. And you do see Steve Erceg connecting on the counters as Kai Kara-France is going for those body shots. But what it does, it starts putting a seed and planting a seed in Steve Erceg's mind that, okay, Kai's going to the body now. And then what do you see? That same combination he threw 3 or 4 times, finally connects, goes over the top with the right hand, comes back with a looping left hook, absolutely cracks Steve Erceg, chases him down, throws another massive right hand that just puts him down. And Kai Kara-France comes out the winner in another round, first round knockout. You know, so many first round knockouts for a flyweight, carries so much power in that division. And it's what makes Kai Kara-France one of the most entertaining fighters in that division as well. And obviously, deservedly going for that title shot. But the thing with these two guys, Moreno and Erceg, when they match up in a fight this weekend, it's going to be all about who can fire better off the jab. I think Moreno, in my opinion, has a slightly... His style is so good because he's so covered, he's so defensively sound. You know, when he's actually taking punches, he gets both hands up in front of his face here to the forehead. He's able to take shots on the back of the gloves. He also does that so well that he knows when that jab or the opponent's strikes hits his glove, he throws the jab so great off of that. And his jab is probably, for me, the best in the division when it comes to him or Erceg. And I think this fight is going to come down to who can, 3 things. Who can put the most pressure on the opponent? Who can control the octagon? Who can push their opponent against the cage and be the one to set the rhythm, be the one to fire their jab off the most? Who can counter better off the jab? So that obviously is dependent on who's throwing the jab, who's controlling the octagon. Who can counter better off the jab? And lastly, I've forgotten. My goodness, I had it in my mind. I just had it in my mind and I've absolutely forgotten it. But that is going to be a key. How can they counter off the jab? Who is going to be the one to push the pace and really be able to fire off that jab? You know, you look at Brandon Moreno when he fights, it's genius the way he's able to counter. Steve Erceg is a little bit different with the counters. It looks a little bit more fluid, but Brandon Moreno throws these looping shots. And I bet you he's looking at that Kai Kara-France finish saying, okay, Kai Kara-France is throwing these looping shots, stepping in and taking the risks. And I don't think Brandon Moreno will be scared of that at all. That's not to say that Steve Erceg won't be fixing those mistakes, fixing like that distance and control in terms of somebody stepping in and rushing him into the space, into the void. But I feel like Brandon Moreno will see, okay, Kai Kara-France was crushing that space and I'm going to be able to exploit it as well. So for me, if you ask me my prediction, as we always do on this channel, on this podcast, I'm going to have to go with Brandon Moreno. Obviously, there is a little bit of bias there because I absolutely love Brandon Moreno. He's one of my favorite fighters. I lived in Mexico for a long time, a year. It was one of the best times of my life. So I obviously feel an affinity to the Mexican people and especially Mexican fighters. So that is part of my decision. I'm not going to deny it. I hate the fact that in sports media, people deny or refuse to say what their biases are. I think it's important to be honest about where some of our opinions come from. But in my analysis as well, I just believe that Brandon Moreno has the speed, technique, defensive responsibility to replicate what Kai Kara-France did. Now, Steve Erceg, obviously, I'll go back to analysis for a second. I know Steve Erceg will be looking at that Royval fight that Brandon Moreno had and say, okay, I can push. If I can push Moreno back like Royval did, then I'm going to have some success. But, you know, I think Brandon Moreno overall has a better skill set. You know, I think if this fight goes to the ground in any way, shape, or form, Brandon Moreno will come out on top of in that sense. And as it is a 5-round main event, again, you know, the experience comes into play. That's not to say that, you know, sometimes I feel like that is lazy analysis, when you just say, okay, he's got more experience, he's going to win. But there's a difference between somebody who is fighting 5-round main events, but someone who is a former champion and somebody who is coming off a 5-round domination of Amir Albazi. He looked so good in that fight. It was so amazing to see just for him as a fan of his game and a fan of the UFC. We need people like Brandon Moreno who are going to deliver fight after fight after fight. It was so good. So I'm just so excited for the fight this weekend. Obviously, I'm wishing both guys the best. I want Brandon Moreno to win because, I just do as a fan. I'm not going to lie to you. But either way, Erceg, if he is able to win this weekend, that's incredible for the sport as well. I think the UFC needs guys like these guys here that have delivered great fight after great fight, who have, entertaining striking. I think a lot of the fans who pay good money to come watch the UFC, whether that's in the arena or for the pay-per-views or have paid for ESPN Plus to watch, the fight nights, they do want to see knockouts. They want to see great striking battles. And that's not to say that we don't want to see grappling, but we're going to get on to the discussion now because this is what the discussion is about. I did a watch along for the Ankalaev versus Pereira card at UFC 313. Obviously, great fights that night. You had Mauricio Rufy, absolutely insane knockout. You had Justin Gaethje versus Fiziev too. It was an amazing night of fights. But as the main event comes on, I was expecting Pereira to come out on top to win by decision or by knockout in terms of, striking. And Ankalaev just came in there and put his game plan in there to perfection. It was such a great performance by Ankalaev in the striking. Did not let Pereira get going. Did not let Pereira have space. Did not let Pereira feel comfortable. Absolutely controlled the pressure as he always does. Ankalaev is an elite fighter. He's done it to the best of the best. Even in his last fight against Rakic, he had Rakic kind of looking similar to Pereira, just, not able to do much. So his style, especially as a southpaw, is suffocating. And he was winning the striking exchanges and landing. Obviously wobbled Alex Pereira as well. Really did hurt him. And Alex Pereira, got hurt towards the end of the round and was able to make it back to his corner and his stool. But I think it was that fourth round, Ankalaev comes out and starts to instill a grappling, quote unquote, game plan and hold Pereira against the fence. I put in a short that I released that was part of the video, addressing that and, kind of voicing my upset and concern about the way MMA judges score fighters holding their opponents up against the fence and not advancing the position. I understand that I understand that Ankalaev was holding Pereira there against his will. So technically, logically in your mind, you're saying, okay, he's holding him there. It's Alex Pereira's job to get out of that position. And therefore, Ankalaev is winning that position and should be gaining points on the judges' scorecards in terms of them awarding the round to Ankalaev. My problem with that logic is that Mark Goddard or whoever the ref was that night had to step in and separate Ankalaev and Pereira from that position due to inactivity from Ankalaev. If you get separated from holding a position for 2 minutes and being completely inactive, not doing any damage, not looking to fight and not looking to win the fight in that position, you then go back to that position. And then you go back to that position. You shouldn't then be rewarded for that and given a winning points in the round. I know maybe you say, okay, well, Pereira didn't do enough to win that round either. I just think that position should be judged as neutral. And a lot of the comments on that post, I think it was on TikTok, YouTube as well, were saying, that I was, wrong and that, it wasn't a good take and stuff like this. But at the end of the day, I love grappling. I love MMA. I don't do a boxing channel. I love boxing, but I don't do a boxing podcast. I love Muay Thai. I would love to talk about more Muay Thai, but I love MMA because it is the most real form of fighting. I just want it to be clear about what should be gaining points. If you are separated from a position like Ankalaev was from Pereira, you shouldn't then be awarded a winning position from a position you have to be separated from. It should just be judged as neutral. And by neutral, I mean nobody is losing and nobody is winning, because it's different from, for example, what Sean Brady did to Leon Edwards. Sean Brady absolutely dominated Leon Edwards from start to finish last weekend in London. And he was doing damage. He was throwing short strikes at the head, threatening submissions, threatening the Kimura, threatening the one-arm guillotine from the top mount. You know, he was absolutely doing stuff that should be scored as positive, should be gaining him points, gaining him the round, winning him time in the octagon. The problem is that you see, for example, holding somebody up against the fence, not taking them down, not doing any damage to them, getting separated should be seen as the same as somebody on the ground grappling with somebody in close guard. And you know what? There's nobody's able to do damage to each other, and the ref steps in and stands them up. You should not be getting, as MMA rules are kind of concerned, you are supposed to be getting judged based on damage. If you are not in any way presenting the intention to deal damage, you should not be winning that round, especially if the referee has to separate you from that position and you then return to it. That is my point. I still think Ankalaev did an incredible job in that fight, deserved to win. I just believe that fourth round was kind of a problem. And for me, it sets a dangerous precedent about what fighters will want to do in championship fights, especially on big pay-per-views. And, you know, I made a joke in that podcast that it was Mario Bautista all over again, who fought Jose Aldo, and people felt like he just held Jose against the cage and Jose did more damage, which I believed as well. The problem is, there needs to be something in the rule set, whether it's the ref in the octagon, whether it's the judges not giving that position as a winning position, holding somebody up against the fence and not doing anything with it. There needs to be some changes there. There needs to be. Because just like in any other sport, the participants of the sport, i.e. fighters or players in basketball, football, NFL or NHL, should be always incentivized to be trying to win the game, the fight at all times. Now, I go on and on and on about in this podcast about how I feel that fighting should be judged entirely different to other sports. It's not a game. So when somebody like Mario Bautista is holding Jose Aldo up against the fence, and when Ankalaev is holding somebody like Pereira up against the fence, it's different than, for example, like time wasting in football, because fighting is a matter of sometimes life or death, and it's serious damage, serious consequences. So from their perspective, I completely understand it. I don't have a problem with that position. I don't have a problem with people wanting to be put in that position. It should just not be incentivized as a dominant winning position. It should be incentivized as a position to stay safe for a fighter. But if they're separated, then it shouldn't. If they're separated and go back to their position, it shouldn't be beneficial to them. That's how I feel. Now, at the end of the day, as a fighter, do what you need to win. If I'm Mario Bautista, I'm not apologizing to anybody. If I'm Ankalaev, I'm champion of the world at light heavyweight. I just beat Alex Pereira, probably the biggest star in the UFC. I'm not apologizing to anybody. I'm about to make so much money in a rematch. So, at the end of the day, it's all love to Ankalaev, his camp. At the end of the day, Pereira is one of my favorite fighters, and I was a bit emotional, obviously, during the fight night. But listen, guys, it's been an incredible journey doing this podcast so far. I do want to get more fighters back on and ask fighters questions like this, and I will be doing that. I promise. The giveaway is coming. Thank you so much for 70 subscribers. We are trying to build this community. This is going to be going out on Friday, a day before fight night, and hopefully I'll be having a watch along this week. If not, that will be coming back maybe for the Josh Emmett card versus Lerone Murphy, but certainly for Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez UFC 314 in a couple of weeks' time. I'm going to be more active on the podcast episodes. I promise. I've just been having a couple issues. So don't worry. Everything's going splendid. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you are new here or if you've been watching and you just like the content. It really means the world to me at the moment. And I will see you next time for episode 24 of the Backseat Fighter podcast. Thank you so much. I've been Charlie Bins.